Safari, you tested positive for HIV.
Imagine an invisible enemy, so cunning it rewrites your very being, silently opening the door to a host of other threats.
Sounds like science fiction, doesn't it?
Totally. But think again. Welcome to the Time Cabinet. Today, we're not just, dusting off old stories. We're diving headfirst into the gripping tale of HIV and AIDS.
A 20th century plague that, well, it still shapes our world profoundly.
And you thought the biggest dramas of the 80s were shoulder pads and hairspray. Oh, honey, hold my AZT.
Right. The reality was much, much darker. In those early days, the emergence of these strange illnesses, it felt like something from a medical thriller.
Yeah, like young, previously healthy men suddenly getting rare cancers.
Exactly. Kaposi sarcoma in New York, pneumocystis pneumonia in L.A., things usually only seen in people with severely weak immune systems. There was this real confusion and fear, a deep fear of the unknown.
Okay, let's unpack that initial alarm, because how this all unfolded really shows how easily fear and, misunderstanding can take hold, right?
Absolutely. And initially, this cluster of symptoms was even labeled, what was it? Gay-related immunodeficiency syndrome.
GRID. Wow.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the implications of that early, very specific label?
Well, it's fascinating and tragic, really. That label reflected existing societal prejudices, and it had huge consequences.
Like what?
It stigmatized a whole community, obviously, but it also, you could argue, slowed down the understanding of how the disease actually spread and who was truly at risk.
So it kind of blinkered the research.
In a way, yes. It influenced priorities, public health messages, all of it. It wasn't until cases started popping up in, a wider range of people.
Right, like women and children.
Hemophiliacs getting blood transfusions, that the real scope started to become clear. And by July 1982, they adopted the official name, AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Much more encompassing and, frankly, terrifying.
That shift in terminology was crucial, wasn't it? It showed a growing, maybe still incomplete, but growing understanding.
Definitely. And a really critical early clue, interestingly, came from the very first officially registered patient in the U.S.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, this person was an immigrant from Haiti who had actually worked in Congo back in the early 1960s.
Congo, okay.
And that seemingly small detail, it turned out to be a vital thread. It led researchers to start looking at potential origins in Africa.
Right. And that's where the scientific detective work gets really compelling, isn't it? Because that Congo connection opened up this whole new line of inquiry.
Exactly. It pointed towards the idea that this human virus might have roots in the animal kingdom.
So what did they find?
Well, research into viruses in African primates turned up something striking, a similarity between HIV and SIV simian immunodeficiency virus.
Found in chimps.
Found in chimpanzees, in Central and West Africa. These chimps had apparently lived with SIV for a long time. So the thinking is, at some point, the virus jumped to humans.
How? Like through hunting?
Most likely through contact with infected monkey blood, yes. During hunting or butchering. And the crucial part, the tragic part, is that once it got into humans, the virus mutated.
It changed.
It evolved into the highly dangerous form we now know as HIV.
Wow. So a virus that was maybe not so bad in chimps became this devastating thing in humans. What makes HIV so uniquely difficult for our bodies?
Well, there are a few key things. Firstly, it has incredibly high antigenic variability, meaning it's constantly changing its appearance, its disguise. That makes it really hard for our immune system or even a potential vaccine to recognize and target it effectively.
Like a master of disguise.
Kind of, yeah. Secondly, it's a retrovirus.
Okay, explain that.
So its genetic material is RNA, not DNA. It uses a special enzyme, reverse transcriptase, to convert its RNA into DNA.
And it inserts itself.
It integrates that DNA right into the DNA of our own immune cells. It basically becomes a permanent part of their genetic code.
That's insane.
It is. And maybe the most dangerous part. You can be infected, have no symptoms for years sometimes, but still transmit the virus. That silent spread. It allowed the epidemic to just explode.
And the truly cruel twist is that HIV itself doesn't directly cause all those illnesses we associate with AIDS, right? It's more like a saboteur.
That's a perfect way to put it. HIV specifically targets and destroys our T lymphocytes, particularly the T helper cells.
The generals of the immune system.
Exactly. T helper cells are crucial. They coordinate the whole immune response. By taking them out, HIV cripples the entire system.
Leaving the body open to attack.
Open to all sorts of opportunistic infections, certain cancers, things a healthy immune system would normally handle easily.
Ow!
She's cut.
Understanding that role of T lymphocytes really hits home how clever, in a horrible way, this virus is.
It's a complex system. T helpers tell the T killers which cells to destroy. They interact with B cells making antibodies. There are also T suppressors that regulate the response. HIV going after the T helpers just throws the whole thing into disarray.
And all this intense science was happening against this backdrop of, well, sheer panic and a lot of bad information. Right?
Oh, absolutely. And the human cost was becoming devastatingly clear. You look at someone like Klaus Nomi.
The countertenor, yeah, very unique performer.
Very unique. And this almost otherworldly persona he had. Sadly, when he got sick with what he called this alien disease, it sort of fit that narrative for some people. His decline was rapid.
And the range of infections he got.
It's just horrific. Pneumonia, Kaposi sarcoma. It was a stark illustration of what this new illness did to the body's defenses.
And then there was that initial deeply damaging idea about who got AIDS.
Aladdin news or the Aladdin news?
The Aladdin news?
You are HIV Aladdin?
That belief that it was only a disease of, drug users and gay men, it was incredibly dangerous.
Why dangerous?
Because it fueled stigma, it stopped people seeking help or information, testing. It hampered the public health response massively.
Until the evidence became undeniable.
Right. When infections started showing up in hemophiliacs getting blood products in women and babies, then the real transmission routes became horrifyingly clear.
Blood, sexual contact, mother to child.
Exactly. But it's so important to stress, there was never any evidence for casual transmission. Not through hugging, sharing cups, none of that.
Myths that cause so much needless fear and cruelty.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, as the medical world grappled with this, the scientists were in this intense race to actually find the cause, the virus itself.
And like a lot of big scientific races, it wasn't exactly smooth sailing, was it? There was some drama.
Oh, definitely. What's fascinating is you had these two major teams, basically neck and neck, on different continents.
Right, Robert Gallo's team in the U.S.?
At the National Cancer Institute, yeah, and Luc Montagnier's team in France, the Pasteur Institute, both pushing hard.
You cannot transmit the HIV virus via frottage. What's frottage?
It's yogurt. It's French.
And it was Montagnier's team in France that got there first, in a sense.
They did. In 1983, they managed to isolate a new retrovirus. They called it LAV, lymphadenopathy-associated virus.
From a patient with swollen lymph nodes.
Exactly, a common early sign. They saw it infecting those crucial T lymphocytes using its reverse transcriptase, the whole mechanism. But, this was groundbreaking, and it was met with a lot of skepticism.
Even within their own institute.
Yeah, even at Pasteur. So in the spirit of collaboration, or maybe to get validation,
They shared their findings.
Montagnier shared samples and data with Gallo's lab in the U.S. But that's where things got complicated.
The collaboration hit a snag.
It did. For reasons that are still debated, Gallo's lab initially couldn't consistently isolate the virus from Montagnier's samples. Communication broke down, and, competition ramped up.
Not exactly ideal when facing a global health crisis.
Not ideal at all. But Montagnier's team decided to publish anyway.
Okay.
May 20th, 1983, in the journal Science. They announced the discovery of LAV. And importantly, they pointed out how it was similar to, but also crucially different from, a virus Gallo's lab knew well, HTLV.
What was the key difference?
The outcome for the T cells. With HTLV, in leukemia, the cells proliferated, they grew uncontrollably. With LAV, in AIDS patients, the T cells were being destroyed. That was a massive piece of the puzzle.
It really highlights how science works sometimes, doesn't it? Collaboration, competition, breakthroughs, and controversy. Even naming the virus became an issue.
Oh, absolutely. With different labs finding similar things, calling them different names, it caused confusion. It wasn't until 1987 that everyone agreed on the name HIV human immunodeficiency virus.
Reflecting what it actually did.
Precisely. And that argument over who discovered it first, who deserved the credit, that went on for years too.
A 3-year battle while the epidemic was raging.
Intense scientific and, frankly, political maneuvering.
Yeah.
Eventually, in 1987, they reached a joint agreement. It basically recognized Montagnier for the initial isolation and Gallo for proving its definitive link to AIDS.
A compromise, then.
A compromise to acknowledge both teams' vital contributions. But while the scientists were battling it out, the human cost was just becoming heartbreakingly visible.
Yeah, the story of Rob Hesson really brought that home to many people, didn't it?
It really did. I mean, here was this huge Hollywood star, the image of masculinity, forced to hide his diagnosis. Why? Because of the stigma, the fear of what it would do to his career, his image.
The secrecy must have been immense.
Totally, even in his final days. And the lawsuits after his death. It just highlighted the isolation people faced. There were reports of special hospital precautions and immediate cremation. It paints a really stark picture of the fear back then.
And the official response in some places was just denial, wasn't it?
The Soviet Union is a really striking example. Their official line was that AIDS was a Western disease, that it couldn't spread there because supposedly they didn't have homosexuality or drug addiction or prostitution.
Which was obviously nonsense. I remember that infamous TV bridge quote about no sex in the USSR.
Exactly. Tragically out of touch. And the consequences of that denial were severe.
Because HIV did get into the Soviet Union.
Of course it did. The first cases included people who traveled, like a military guy back from Tanzania who unknowingly infected dozens. And then that awful outbreak in Alista.
What happened there?
Medical negligence, reusing contaminated syringes and catheters in a hospital. Dozens of babies got infected. Just horrific. Showed the real cost of ignorance and failing basic infection control.
And then you have figures like Freddie Mercury. His story also made the reality impossible to ignore.
Freddie's decline was so public, in a way. That physical change over his last few years was a stark, visible sign of the virus's progression.
That final video, "These are the days of our lives."
Incredibly poignant, his frailness, the lyrics. It's a powerful reminder. And the fact he never got to perform Barcelona at the Olympics with Montserrat Caballé because he died, another life cut short.
And then there's Ryan White. Such a different story, but so impactful.
Ryan's story. It's heartbreaking, but also inspiring. A young kid, a hemophiliac, infected through blood products.
And the discrimination he faced was just unbelievable.
Appalling. Bullied relentlessly, legal fights just to go to school, his community ostracizing him. Someone even shot a bullet through their window.
Just horrific.
But his courage, his advocacy, he met with President Reagan, he spoke out. He played a massive role in changing public perception, and his legacy is the Ryan White Care Act.
Which provides funding for HIV/AIDS care.
Exactly. Essential care and support for countless people, a real turning point providing that safety net. But the real game changer, in terms of the disease itself, came a bit later.
The treatments.
June 1995, the FDA approves the first protease inhibitor, an enzyme-blocking drug. That marked the start of highly active antiretroviral therapy.
And that changed everything, didn't it? It wasn't necessarily a cure, but
it turned what was almost certainly a death sentence into a manageable chronic condition for many. This combination of drugs, it dramatically slashed death rates, hospitalizations, certainly in wealthier countries. It offered real hope.
So people could live long lives.
Yes. Modern therapy, often just one pill a day now, can suppress the virus to undetectable levels. If you're diagnosed early and stick to treatment, your life expectancy, your quality of life can be pretty similar to someone without HIV.
And mothers with HIV can have healthy babies.
Absolutely. With consistent medication, the risk of transmission is virtually eliminated.
We see famous examples now, people living full lives with HIV.
Right. People like Charlie Sheen, Magic Johnson, they've lived with HIV for years, stayed active, visible. It's helped reduce stigma and show how effective treatment is.
And there's that crucial concept.
Undetectable equals untransmittable.
Yeah.
Huge. Scientific studies show that if your viral load is suppressed to undetectable levels by treatment, you cannot transmit HIV sexually. It's massive for personal health and public health.
It's incredible progress, and efforts are ongoing to make these drugs accessible everywhere, right? Like in Russia.
Yeah, establishing local production of generic HIV meds like in Irkutsk is a big step. Making affordable, quality drugs domestically helps cover the need.
And the focus is on making treatment easier.
Definitely. Developing those convenient once-a-day combination pills improves adherence, quality of life. Plus, things like pre-exposure prophylaxis and PEP post-exposure prophylaxis are becoming more available there too, which is key for prevention.
But despite all this amazing progress, we can't get complacent. It's still a huge global crisis.
Tragically, yes. Globally.
Yeah.
Estimate is around 35 million deaths since the start, and about 35 million people living with HIV right now.
That death toll, it's like World War levels.
It really puts it in perspective. And stories like Rudolf Nureyev's, the dancer, remind us of the ongoing impact.
His story is quite moving, especially his initial reluctance towards treatment.
Yeah, he seemed hesitant, maybe wanting to keep up his intense performance schedule, but it had tragic consequences. He stayed dedicated to his art, even made a final trip back to Russia, but ultimately died from pneumocystis pneumonia.
An opportunistic infection.
Exactly. Shows the vulnerability if HIV isn't managed effectively.
And the way the epidemic evolved in Russia is also a sobering lesson, isn't it? How it shifted.
Definitely. In the late 90s, it was heavily linked to injecting drug use. But now, it affects everyone, all demographics, all socioeconomic groups.
What are the numbers like now in Russia?
Around 1 million people living with HIV. Some regions have really high infection rates. Kemerovo, Irkutsk, Sverdlovsk, Oblasts.
Yeah.
It's clearly not just a disease of specific groups anymore.
And new infections are still happening daily.
Alarming numbers.
Yeah.
Still around 270 new infections reported every day in Russia. That underscores the scale of the ongoing crisis.
That is staggering. But you mentioned testing efforts are significant there.
Yeah, huge numbers of tests annually, like 30 million. Mandatory testing for some groups, plus more anonymous testing, even self-tests using saliva. Getting people diagnosed early is crucial.
And research for a vaccine continues.
Yes, efforts in the U.S., in Russia, elsewhere. But it's incredibly complex. HIV's ability to mutate makes vaccine development a massive challenge. Clinical trials take a very long time.
So the progress in treatment is phenomenal, but the sheer number of ongoing infections, especially in places like Russia, it's a stark reminder.
It really is.
Yeah.
When you think about the prevalence, maybe 6 out of every 1,000 people in Russia living with HIV and thousands of new cases every month, it makes you ask, what more do we need to call this an epidemic?
Yeah. From that mysterious cluster of illnesses to a global pandemic.
Yeah.
The story of HIV and AIDS is just this powerful, stark reminder of how connected we all are and the power of the unseen world. Science has made incredible strides, truly. But the fight isn't over.
Not by a long shot.
So as we reflect on the battles won, the huge challenge is still ahead. What responsibility do we each have in understanding, in addressing, in ending this ongoing human story?
That's the key question. And this deep dive, it's really just scratched the surface. There's so much more. The researchers' work, the powerful stories of people affected, the fight against stigma, the push for access to treatment and prevention.
We really encourage you to look deeper.
Definitely. What questions did this raise for you? What part of this history really hit home? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep this vital conversation going.
Thank you for joining us here at the Time Cabinet. If you found this valuable, maybe thought-provoking, please do like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the moments that shaped our world.